On December 21st, 1943, a high-altitude flight over the Alaskan interior ended in a fiery crash atop a mountain overlooking the Charley River inside what is today Yukon-Charley Rivers National Preserve. The airplane was a B-24 Liberator, a popular heavy bomber for Allied and American forces during World War II, and it carried a crew of 5. Only one of them survived the disaster, although co-pilot Lieutenant Leon Crane managed to save his own life by parachuting to Earth. His narrow escape from death landed him in an equally perilous situation. For the next 84 days, he was alone in the wilderness in the middle of an Alaska winter. Lieutenant Crane's ordeal began as a routine test flight, but at 25,000 feet, one of the plane's 4 engines malfunctioned and the aircraft suddenly began to spiral out of control. Although Crane and pilot Lieutenant Harold Hoskins struggled with the controls, they could not right the aircraft. Buffeted by high winds and crushing centrifugal forces, they sounded the alarm to abandon ship. In the chaos, Lieutenant Crane managed to don a parachute before leaping through the open bomb bay doors. He later recalled the blast of biting cold that struck his hands and face as he floated toward the ground, and the huge blob of red flame when his plane struck the mountainside. When Crane landed hip-deep in snow, he was suddenly very alone. He repeatedly called "Ho" at the top of his lungs, but the only response was silence. Realizing that he had no idea where he was and no food or sleeping bag, he quickly decided that he must move or freeze to death. The temperature was 40 below zero and would only drop as night fell. So after wrapping himself in his silk parachute, he began descending to the river below. The explosion and fire at the crash site had destroyed any supplies he might use, so Crane took stock of his only survival tools: 2 packs of matches, a Boy Scout knife, and his parachute that served as a sleeping bag. For 9 days he huddled in an improvised campsite under a spruce tree where he dreamed of steak, mashed potatoes, and milkshakes and battled feelings of despair. The squirrels he tried to kill skipped away from his makeshift spear, bow and arrow and slingshot, and after 9 days of living on nothing but water, he knew his strength would not last. Once Crane decided a rescue party was unlikely, he began following the river north, and after a difficult day of struggling through deep snow, he discovered something wonderful: a small snow-covered cabin and an elevated cache which contained a larder of sugar, powdered milk, and canned food. A rifle, a frying pan, canvas tents, and a pair of moose hide mittens. Within minutes, he had a fire in the cook stove and was sipping a steaming cup of hot cocoa. A tough old trapper and miner named Phil Burrell had built the cabin, and what Crane would later learn was that the Charley River was a popular trapping area for local residents who constructed a string of small cabins along their trap lines, some of which were stocked with survival rations. However, Crane's ordeal was far from over. He was still lost and had to regain his strength and tend to his frostbitten hands and feet. In early February, Crane decided that waiting for warmer temperatures was not an option. After building a sled to carry food and supplies and then abandoning it as too heavy and clumsy, Crane pushed on through snowstorms and high winds, occasionally pausing to shoot a ptarmigan or to dry his clothes after an unexpected plunge through thin ice. His progress was halting, but he finally found a sled trail that led him to yet another cabin, but this one was occupied by the trapper Albert Ames and his family. In his published account, Crane described the moment he looked in a mirror at the Ames homestead. "I had a 2-inch beard, black as coal. My hair was long and matted, covering my ears and coming down over my forehead almost to my eyes, so that I looked like some strange species of prehistoric man. I was dirty and sunburned and wind-burned, and my eyes stared back at me from the centers of 2 deep black circles. After a meal of pancakes and moose steaks and 2 days' rest, Crane mushed with Ames to the woodchopper mining camp along the Yukon River and flew back to Ladd Field near Fairbanks to report to his commanding officer. In October 1944, Crane led a recovery team to retrieve the remains of 2 of his crewmen, Lieutenant James Seibert and Sergeant Ralph Wenz. No evidence of Master Sergeant Richard Pompeo thought to have parachuted free of the plane nor pilot lieutenant. Hoskins was found. In 2006, a team from the Joint Palmia Accounting Command traveled to the site at the request of the National Park Service and found bone fragments believed to be those of Lieutenant Hoskins. The remains were returned to his family and then buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Today, the tangled wreckage of the B-24 Liberator exists as a poignant reminder of lives lost and of a survival story that will endure for the ages. Another day I will always remember tonight. At about 6:30 p.m., I happened to be out in the hall when Major Kane came rushing over from operations with some amazing news. A pilot of Alaska Airlines had radioed that he was bringing in a lieutenant. We contacted him and asked whether Crane was alive or dead. The reply, very much alive, came back over the air. The plane was coming from a place called Woodchopper, which is up on the Yukon River some distance southeast of Circle. About 5 of us hopped into a car and drove over to Weeks Field in Fairbanks at 7 o'clock. The plane landed and out hopped old Crane. Crane survived over 80 days in the Alaskan wilderness, with no training, no experience in the Arctic, and no survival skills. That he survived is a testament to keeping calm in the face of absurd danger. Yes, his life was saved by 2 well-stocked cabins, but he spent 9 days before he discovered the first, and nearly 2 months walking and camping in the open en route to his ticket home. Hunter Stephen Ranella wrote about Crane in his recent book, The Meat-Eater Guide to Wilderness Skills and Survival. There's a lot to love from that story, and a lot to learn from it. First and foremost is Crane's mental and physical tenacity. After watching his fellow airmen die, he suffers hunger, cold, and loneliness for weeks on end without giving in to despair or making foolish mistakes. He's calculating in his movements and mindful of when it's time to pack up and go. When he travels, he does so with purpose and lets the landscape guide his movements. His ultimate salvation is testament to the fact that he doesn't make big mistakes. After returning to Ladd Field, a surgeon evaluated Crane to be in good health, even having gained a little weight. After calling Crane's parents to assure them that their son was alive, Crane joined a rescue team to locate the site of the crash and search for the other missing crewmen. At the crash site, the remains of Lieutenant Seibert and Sergeant Wenz were found, but no trace was found of Hoskins or Pompeo until 2006. When a research team at the site of the crash discovered metal buckles determined to be from Hoskins' parachute, with Hoskins' remains nearby. Hoskins was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors on September 7, 2007. Not much is known about Crane after he retired from the Army Air Force after World War II. After returning home to Philadelphia, Crane became an aeronautical engineer, helping to design some of the first helicopters. Later, he started a construction business with 3 of his 6 children. 3 years after Crane's death, 2 of his children went on an 8-day journey by plane and river raft along the path their father had taken, finding both the Burrell and Ames cabin, both now just collapsed piles of logs.